welcome everyone. We're really excited to have this webinar today. We got over 550 people registered, so it seems that this topic is not only top of mind for us and for me personally, but there are a couple of people around this room who are excited about SDVs. So before we get started, a couple of questions. We're going to talk in details today about cybersecurity and SDV, but how come we're starting this so early, right now? And also, if we're coming out of a world where there are hundreds of millions of connected vehicles that using loads of data and cybersecurity being processed, isn't shifting to SDV gonna increase that cost 10x more? And they say that SDVs are coming, right? Already here, fast, hitting the road running. But are we ready? Are you ready? And to answer some of those questions, I have my partners in crime here, Tom and Tarun. How about Tarun, you get things started?
Yeah, thanks very much, Anand. So I'm Tarun Sharma. I'm a product management director within the IVY business unit at BlackBerry. So that's just a quick intro from me. And Tom, do you want to just very quickly give an intro before I kick off on talking about SDVs?
Sure, thanks, Tarun. So I'm Tom. Hi, everyone. I'm Director of Data Analytics at Upstream. And as Arnold said earlier, it's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Okay, thanks a lot, Tom. And again, thanks for the intro on. And yeah, we do have a lot to talk about today, and just really want to set the scene very quickly with the slide that we've got up on the screen now. As Arno mentioned, software-defined vehicles are really set to become the norm. So what we're seeing there is some simplification on the hardware side, but much more complexity on the software side, and we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation today. And really, with all of that, we have our software bill of materials, or our SBOM, is effectively driven OTA in that we're able to update very easily over the air. And again, that's a key advantage with software-defined vehicles. But as a result of this and all the connected services that we have, we see a lot of new ecosystem providers and third parties and new services coming about, and therefore there are new APIs that are effectively being used to deliver these services, which of course does potentially increase risk on the security perspective. And the other thing I think at the moment that we're seeing with connected vehicles is the insights are really limited to the current connected vehicle data that we have, and we're going to explore a little bit on how we can actually take data directly from the vehicle and process it locally. So what I'll do, I'll just hand back over to Anand to briefly go through the flow of the webinar overall.
Sure. Tarun, I think you've been around SDVs for quite some times now, and through the partnership with BlackBerry IVY here at Upstream, we've learned a lot. And what we're about to do with you today is basically go to 6 topics. First and foremost, talk a little bit about the landscape and the power of data in SDV. I'll let you, Tarun, walk through IVY's vision. So going a little bit further to cybersecurity, and then we'll dive deep into the attacker's perspective. So what does cyber and SDV could look like theoretically? We'll talk a little bit about security in the loop, which is a new era of how we look at security, not only as part of monitoring, but also as part of development and ongoing detection and response. And then, to my favorite part, the demo or the use cases. I know some of you that have been at CES have seen it in details. We're going to have a sneak peek as to how the cyber attacks in an SDV environment could already look like. With that said, how about, Tarun, you kick it off with a little bit about the landscape and where we are at the moment, and how does the future look like?
Sure, thanks, Anand. So a little bit about software-defined vehicles, really. I mean, the first thing I like to talk about when I start talking about SDVs is using a smartphone as an example. So myself and Anand could go into a store and buy the same smartphone, and they're identical out of the box. But if we were to meet up a week later, what you'll find is that they're completely different. They have completely different applications, different services running, configured completely differently. And it gives you an example, really, of the power of software, because essentially what you find with a smartphone is all the services and everything that you see on there is all very much driven from a software perspective. And the same is true really of a software-defined vehicle. So what we're trying to do is really sort of separate software from hardware. So software controls many of the core vehicle functions rather than purely mechanical systems, which we had in the past. And this really allows automakers to reduce hardware complexity and also costs by kind of consolidating components into centralized compute systems. So for example, you can have a single high performance domain controller that can now sort of handle tasks traditionally distributed across lots of different dedicated controllers. And this really allows us to then to receive sensor data into that domain controller and send outputs to powertrain, chassis, infotainment, and other systems. But we can also make use of that data through other ways, which we'll talk about with BlackBerry IVY. But of course, this potentially increases the attack surface area for a bad actor. And again, we're going to talk about that in this presentation. And I'm also going to talk on the right-hand side about some of the challenges that we find with trying to actually make sense of data that we have on vehicles. So we find typically at the moment that solutions can't easily be ported. We have different runtime environments. We have fragmented architecture, different signal solutions. So, you know, we have different operating systems and signals are very much, or can be very much, you know, difficult to actually ingest because we've got lots of different signal formats out there. And then there's all of the cloud compute costs that we find and cloud storage costs and also data transmission costs, because at the moment we're finding that automakers are sending a huge amount of data up to the cloud and then, you know, processing it in the cloud. So we're going to take a look at how we can actually tackle that. And typically we find the development expertise required to roll solutions out onto vehicles requires developers that are highly skilled in automotive embedded development from the top of the stack right down to the bottom of the stack. And that's also something that we can address with BlackBerry IVY, and we'll show why we're partnered with Upstream on their security solution there. Privacy, security, we need to handle that properly as well. And then that lifecycle management of software versions. So where you've got a third party with software components, we have to make sure that we're managing the lifecycle around that. And if we move to a diagram now of IVY, I'll talk a little bit about it. So IVY is a solution that we developed in partnership with AWS, but it is cloud and operating system agnostic. So we're not just tied into a single cloud service provider or a single operating system. But really the reason that we partnered with AWS on that was because of their cloud expertise and then our expertise on the automotive side. But what it effectively is, it's an edge-first solution, which means we have in-vehicle processing of data, but it's controlled and configured from the cloud. So automakers can deploy software sensors that could also incorporate machine learning models, and they can actually deploy that from the cloud for execution in the vehicle. And those software sensors generate insights, and those insights can then be ingested into applications either on or off the vehicle, which is what you're seeing with the arrows that are coming out of the vehicle there. And we're showing that you can have cloud instances that are ingesting the insights. So for example, a fleet management console, or you could be displaying information to the user within the vehicle. And as I mentioned earlier, because those insights are generated locally, we see a significant reduction in data transmission costs and cloud compute and storage costs as well. And it's important to note that at all times, even with this solution here, we make sure that the automaker's got full control over what's deployed and all of the policies and permissions for processing data on the vehicle. And then the last thing to mention about IVY is that when we actually bring signals up through our hardware abstraction layer, we standardize them into a single format. So any software sensors that are either built by the automaker or third-party ecosystem partner, they can be easily ported to different vehicles running IVY. So it really makes our solution truly scalable. So in summary, we're providing faster innovation, improved economics, scalability, and also control of policies and permissions, and we're also OS and cloud agnostic. So that's a little bit about IVY. And what I'm going to do is just hand that back over to Arnon now to talk about the attacker perspective and then what we're doing about that and why we partnered with Upstream to get their solution running on BlackBerry IVY.
Fantastic. So some of you have already seen that it was literally part of our cybersecurity yearly report, which was published recently. We see a similar number of black hat attacks, so there isn't a big change over there. It is significant though. 64% of all attacks are carried by black hat actors, the bad guys. But what we do see is that remote attacks stay similar, but long-term attacks are up from 70% to 85%, and that's a big increase. And we keep talking about the inflection point. What we're seeing here is the ability of attackers to reach even higher heights with simple introduction of EVs into the market, which is the beginning of the SDV evolution. The more APIs, the more attack surfaces, you've seen that the number of high and massive scale attacks almost increased by 2.5x, which is a huge number. And those are reported attacks, as you can learn from our report. And we're looking at an area where there are more attack surfaces coming up. And maybe, Tom, we look at the limited number of SDVs on the road, mainly EVs, but we already see attackers targeting software-defined systems, and attack surfaces show a trend or amplifies with more SDVs on the road. Can you tell us a little bit about the attack vectors?
I think that the scale of impact that you mentioned earlier is also reflected in the emergence of attack vectors that are related to the remote connectivity of the vehicle. For example, we can see that attacks targeting the infotainment systems within the vehicle have doubled themselves since last year. And also we can see, for example, on the right-hand side, that attacks targeting the OEM's telematics and cloud systems have increased from 35% last year to 43% in 2023. And as you said, these new capabilities and new concepts that we see that are already adopted from the SDV world and the new capabilities that we see mainly in EVs nowadays also require us to define a new cybersecurity paradigm to secure our vehicles from such attacks. Arnon, could you explain us maybe a bit about security in the loop and how is it related to this whole concept of securing SDVs? Arnon, I think you're muted.
I said, of course, it's a pleasure. Thank you. I think the credit goes to Giuseppe, who coined this term last year. We presented security in the loop, I think, back in 2023. And before revealing, we're looking at a change of a paradigm, because what used to be an SBOM, what used to be a fixed product that would ship out, is gradually moving into a more sophisticated paradigm. You look at SDVs changing the way that the SBOM is implemented. So the moment, like Tarun said, the moment that your SDV leaves the factory, it starts changing. And if you're following, as they say, the regulator is the CISO's best friend. If you follow the regulation, whether it's WP29R155 or the NHTSA's recent regulations, you will see strict requirements coming up so that the market can actually follow the development of this process. And if we talk and encapsulate this, it's a dynamic framework rather than a static one. So you start thinking about the SBOM from a cyber risk analysis, and here comes security in the loop. Now, most of you that have been here far more than both of us have known the verification and the validation stage in the TARA, but we're looking both on the CSMS and SUMS standards and regulations the requirement to monitor, detect, and respond. And by interpreting that, you need to look at other pieces in the pie, which relates to CTI, cyber threat intelligence, to the monitoring through the VSOC, and vulnerability management. Now, this is an infinite loop, because what basically happened is that the SBOM risk evolves beyond the TARA. It includes now VM, CTI, and the VSOC, and it integrates real-life detection, the VSOC, the Vehicle Security Operations Center, with potential bad actors, CTI, that talk on the deep or the dark web about the vulnerability of a specific ECU. And then you manage those vulnerabilities. And even if you patch that, you constantly monitoring, because someone might have gone access to credentials, and you need to feed that back into the loop. So I think that shifting left in cybersecurity, keeping security in the loop, is something critical that we see, because it's not only about patching or remediating the attack, and we're going to talk about attacks real soon, but it also feeds the development process. So virtualizing ECUs and being able to look into faster development cycle through SDVs allow the OEM to really go into that security in the loop mindset, and we'll talk more about that. But if I'm thinking about SDV lifecycle, how does that relate to SDV, Tarun?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, isn't it? And I think you've kind of touched on it there, where you've talked about the fact that we when we have a software-defined vehicle, it does make it very much easier for us to address some of these security concerns by providing those changes to software as required. So, as you said, not just patches, but also being able to address some of the solutions more immediately. So I think what I wanted to do as well is really talk about the whole reason why Upstream and IVY came together to effectively get Upstream's solution running on BlackBerry IVY. And this diagram will really sort of show you a little bit more about that, because as we mentioned before, IVY gives us potential access to standardized signals. Okay, so to Upstream, when they're building a software sensor, they have access to those signals, and we have over 1,000 signals that our hardware abstraction layer can bring up and then present to software sensors, such as Upstream sensor. And that allows Upstream then to take much of the processing that they used to only run in the cloud, and then the processing for their detection and response can then be run at the vehicle edge. And then the generated insights from there can then be sent to the cloud for their security event and incident management console. And what that really means is that we're only sending the insights from the vehicle rather than the actual data through a connected vehicle and then processing that data in the cloud. So it really allows us to really sort of streamline that whole process in terms of how we actually process the data by doing it on the vehicle. And if we just go to the next slide on, and we've got some figures around that, and the fact that we have around 80% less data that's sent to the cloud as a result of that. And also we increase the sampling rate. So we're able to sample data on the vehicle at a much more increased rate than if we're actually processing in the cloud itself. And that's, again, a huge advantage of running the Upstream solution on BlackBerry IVY.
Yeah, I think that the idea of being able to close the security loop in the SDV through the edge power, detect and response is a real game changer, right? But maybe you can walk us through how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're talking about here, and what I'll do is I'll hand over to Tom on a few of the bullets as well to talk about some of the advantages. But what we're really doing here, if we zoom in a little bit, we're actually processing at the vehicle edge. So again, I mentioned that the OEMs are able to push down software sensors such as Upstreams to the vehicle edge itself. And by running an IVY, we're able to take sensors, which you can see there from various different ECUs. So we're actually able to take software signals and then actually ingest those into Upstream's software sensor, and then produce the insights that we need to send to Upstream's console. Now, the way that we do that is through the telematics that we have in the vehicle. So what we're really doing is using the data plane to send those updates or those insights rather to Upstream's console. And what that does is, as I mentioned in the previous slide, it gives us that smarter detection at the vehicle edge. So we're actually detecting any potential issues there with the software sensor at the vehicle edge itself rather than in the cloud. And where there are machine learning models as well, they can also be run within BlackBerry's runtime environment or BlackBerry IVY's runtime environment for the generation of those insights. And I'll just hand over to Tom to talk a little bit about the advantages from a cybersecurity perspective.
So, Tarun, as you said, we are deployed at the edge. We are able to run our sensor, I would call it the Upstream's brain, and our trained models. And by that, we can ensure that only relevant cybersecurity events are then sent to the cloud, on which we can enrich the Upstream digital twin, which is a digital representation of the vehicle. And then when an alert pops up on the VSOC screen, we can really help the VSOC analyst to speed up the investigation by this bidirectional communication with the IVY synthetic sensor. And we can collect additional signals to speed up the investigation and close this loop faster. And though speaking about architecture is super interesting, now we are really reaching to the part that excites me the most, or maybe scares me the most. It really depends on how your favorite OEM handles this kind of situations. So for the first use case that we are going to demonstrate, Arnon, I heard that you drive your car quite peacefully, but let's imagine this horrible scenario when an attacker is able to compromise the ADAS system across multiple vehicles simultaneously, and by that, make your car, theoretically, again, crash into the wall. So we can assume, for example, that Arnon here is driving his vehicle peacefully, 20 miles per hour, right? That's what you drive usually. And then all of a sudden, we can see, nah. Okay, so we don't tell this to anyone. So maybe 30 miles per hour. But then we can see that the cruise control is turned on and then immediately vanishes. And right after that, we can see that the speedometer increases to 65 miles per hour, while our own Arnon didn't do anything, just drove regularly his car. So
that's
Tarun,
scary.
Yeah, it is scary. And just to calm us down a bit, Tarun, could you show us maybe how this whole thing detected using IVY and Upstream?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is, we again, going back to the fact that we've got IVY's running Upstream's software sensor, and as a result of that, we're able to ingest those signals that we see on the left into IVY, and we normalize those signals and then provide those to Upstream's software sensor. Now, Upstream's IVY sensor will then identify that the vehicle speed increased without driver involvement by looking at the various signals that are available to their software sensor. Now, that event and also the related details can be sent to Upstream's platform. And the really cool thing is, and I know you're going to show this in a second, Tom, is that this can also be cross-correlated across the fleet. So if you've got a fleet of vehicles, you can analyze if there's an issue that's being seen across multiple vehicles. And because we've got all of that data coming into Upstream software sensor, we can really continuously monitor ADAS, accelerator pedal position, vehicle speed, and also all of the powertrain metrics. And what we'll show now, and what Tom's going to take you through, is how those insights then go through to Upstream's platform and how we can actually look at that on the console itself.
Perfect. So as Tarun said, even if this happened to one vehicle, maybe we can try to dismiss it by saying that it might be a result of a defect software or something like that. But with monitoring, with the capability to monitor multiple vehicles that run IVY, we can trigger an alert only if it happens to multiple vehicles all at the same time and maybe with similar characteristics. So now let's see what does the analyst see. So we can see the different vehicles that are affected. We can see where they are located to try to narrow down the situation. And then we can really deep dive into each one of the vehicles, see the chain of events and all relevant powertrain metrics that are collected from the vehicle to ensure that the VSOC analyst has all the needed information to understand the situation and then mitigate it to secure us from such horrible situations. So, yeah, Arnon, how do you feel right now? Do you feel more comfortable, or are you still scared a bit?
I don't know. Well, you know, Netflix seems to have some scary movies around SDVs or EVs. To the ones who did not watch the movie, personal view, nothing to write home about, but you do want to get that piece about the SDV autopilot. It's a scene to remember. But the first use case or the demo that you shared does seem, you know, focus on compromising ADAS. It sounds like a little bit of a horror story. Is that something we see already in real life?
So not yet from black hat hackers, but the next use case is something that we have seen with some of our customers.
Okay. Okay, that's a good sign, a sign of relief. But maybe hold your breath, right? We're going to get there right away. But we wanted to run by you a very quick survey through our friends at Mobex, asking a simple question to hundreds of people focusing on SDVs. And the question goes around evaluating SDV cyber implications. And some of you may say, sure, it's already in the plans, we're already working on that, absolutely. And some may say, well, yes, but not yet, maybe later this year or next year, or maybe it's not even in your department, not even your team. But we'd love for you to take a minute and hit the right answer. So we'll leave the survey for maybe 10 more seconds and allow people who did not vote yet to take a chance and do that and be part of this SDV cybersecurity game. And I'll do the countdown. Tom, be ready. So we're going 5, 4, 4.5. Just kidding. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the next use case. You're saying that this already happened in real life, correct?
Yeah. Tarun, you live in London. I guess that sometimes you might use your mobile app to remotely ignite your vehicle or to heat up the seats in your car, and that's perfectly fine. But what if Arnon were able to do that to your car? And to double down on this, what if attackers could leverage this OEM's API infrastructure to remotely access critical safety or intimate components inside our vehicles? And in this example, what we're going to show is how attacker exploits this infrastructure to drain the EV battery of the car. So it all starts when the attacker sends remote turn on AC commands to the vehicle, and the weather is cold. So the vehicle is not only turning on the heat, but also turn on the preconditioning of the battery. And by that, when the driver comes back to the vehicle the morning after, the vehicle battery has is much lower than when he left it before that. And so that's what happened to the vehicle. And the way that we identify that is by running our sensor on IVY. What we can do, like if without that, we will have to send the battery level metrics to the cloud like every 1 minute or every 2 minutes to make sure that we know what is the exact situation. With IVY, what we can do, we can monitor all of that at the edge and then send the event to the cloud only if we identify the high battery drain rate while the vehicle is parked. And on the cloud, on the Upstream platform, we combine this information with the data that we get from the OEM's API ecosystem. And we can see that the action invoking command, for example, in this situation, the turn on heat command, was sent to the vehicle. And then by combining these two events, we can really understand, okay, there is a situation here that we want to investigate and mitigate. And now Tarun will show us how the VSOC analysts can speed up the investigation and close the loop by leveraging IV sensor.
Absolutely, and that's another thing here that we can look at with Ivy is that once we've got Upstream software sensor there, if the Upstream platform wishes to receive more data in terms of the absolute status of the vehicle, that can be very easily pulled from the sensor values or the signal values that we're seeing coming up through the stack. So in this particular case, when we identified the problem, which Tom has kind of alluded to there, and spoke about the fact that the whole HVAC system has been activated. We're heating the vehicle, we're preconditioning the battery, and so on. For further investigation, what can be done here is we can actually take these. We've got it written there as data requests because what we're effectively doing is taking Upstream software sensor and then taking those signals and really gathering the data of the current status of the vehicle from the HVAC perspective, exterior air temperature, and the battery temperature. So we're able to collate that information and send it back to Upstream's platform as well for part of the actual investigation. So that the point being here that we're not just acting only on the data that we are really initially processing using Upstream's software sensor, but the fact that once we detect an issue, we can also come back and look at other signals on the vehicle and send information on those signals back up to Upstream's console for further analysis. And it's really powerful having the ability to actually do that. And I think, again, the thing to do now is for Tom to show a little bit more of what the VSOC analyst will see as a result of that additional data being sent up to the cloud.
So from the VSOC analyst point of view, what we can see is that when we click on the alert, we can see the entire chain of events because we see all messages that sent from both the vehicle and the API consumer, all relevant battery metrics and HVAC metrics that are relevant for this kind of investigation. And then if we want to deep dive into the situation, we can go to the advanced investigation to see the entire messages that were sent and seem to be relevant to this specific event. For example, new consumer that is communicating with the vehicle, the commands that are sent to the vehicle, and the point in time where the battery has started to drain. And now, after understanding and capturing all of this, I think we're ready to go back to Arnon. What do you think, Arnon?
I feel warm and fuzzy as the guy who came to his car that morning and found it not only empty but heated nicely. I think that one thing we're getting towards a recap, and one other favorite movies of mine is encapsulating what I feel that we're in the cusp of. SDVs come with a great promise and with lots of opportunities and great features. And as Tarun said, it's an iPhone that gets updated. It's the gift that keeps on giving. But we need to bear in mind that with great power comes great responsibility, and we need to have that mindset of keeping security in the loop, not only at the design phase, not only the pen testing. When the vehicle leaves the factory, we keep on monitoring through the VSOC, we keep on doing CTI to identify potential threats, and we need to keep that vulnerability and shift left towards a new paradigm into a dynamic SBOM. Tarun, maybe you want to wrap up about this vehicle XDR concept.
Absolutely. By really being able to execute on the vehicle edge, vehicle-based extended detection and response is really something that we can make a reality here in terms of services that are actually running on the vehicle. So we're able to, as we mentioned earlier, we're able to increase that sample rate. We're able to detect issues on the vehicle in terms of really being able to ingest all of those signals and look for anomalies where we're seeing something that's happening, where you have a cause, where the effect is potentially not something that was requested by the user, and being able to flag such incidents. And again, with it being edge powered, what we're really seeing here is that we don't have to transmit all of the data from the vehicle all of the time. And I think that's really something that we need to pay great attention to, because as soon as we got connected vehicles, what we were seeing was that we were just sending absolute gigabytes of data up to the cloud and analyzing there. But instead, we're now pulling that power back down to the vehicle edge by having these more high performance compute platforms. It gives us that ability then to process at the edge, and we get that reduction in data. As we mentioned here, around an 80% reduction, but also the reduction in cloud compute costs and the reduction in cloud storage costs as well. So it really is a win-win situation in that respect.
That's awesome. With that, I wanted to, before we move, we're there. I mean, we made it. It's, I think we're also on time. That's amazing. Thank you, guys. To those who sent out questions and we won't be able to answer now, maybe we'll do that offline. So feel free to reach out, and we'll take that further. Happy that we're able not only to cover a lot of the questions today, but also to cover this topic with so many of you asking so many questions. So I wanted to thank Tarun from BlackBerry IVY and our very own Tom for being great subject matter experts. Thank you so much.